I always say stuff like that, like, we are not mental machines. But like, you're like, no, really, we're not mental machines. Maggie Jackson is an award-winning author and journalist known for her prescient writings on social trends, particularly technology's impact on humanity. She has a gorgeous way of writing in such a way that you feel the intense stakes, emotional, mental stakes of who she has applied her mighty pen to. She is the author of a book that I can't stop thinking about. It's called Uncertain: The Wisdom and Wonder of Being Unsure. Maggie, this is my mental super heaven, and you're in it. So thank you so much.
It's so great to be here. Wonderful to share this time.
I think we all understand the feeling of being uncertain, like the anxiousness, that prickly, racy, anticipatory. But I wondered if you could just start us there. How do you define the sphere of uncertainty?
Well, first, I think just to define it a little bit, in very brief, people talk about the uncertainty, and that's sort of a shorthand for the unknown.
Uh-huh.
You really don't know if the volcano will erupt next Tuesday, despite your probabilistic mathematical models, etc. So we're always living with the unknown, what we don't know. But then in complement, it's not in contrast, it's in complement. There is our uncertainty, and that is the human response to the unknown. That's what happens to humanity when we meet something new or murky or ambiguous. And, that's really where we get that unsettling feeling. We are, by nature, humans who need answers. I mean, like any organism, but we need answers. We need to survive by gaining answers. So when we meet these new, difficult, murky things along the shadow on the trail or the new, day on the job, etc., we have a stress response.
Yes.
So the body and brain kind of spring into action, and your heart might beat or your palms might sweat, etc., depending on the circumstances. But at the same time, new discoveries of probing into this mindset are showing that the brain undergoes remarkable changes, such as your focus widens. You become more kind of aware. They even call it curious eyes, which is fantastic. And your working memory is bolstered, and then your brain becomes more receptive to new data. This is very, very new science. And so basically, scientists now think of uncertainty as good stress, as wakefulness, which is not what we think of.
No, because I saw your book title and I was like, no, Maggie, I hate uncertainty. All I do is try to survive uncertainty. So even just that first step of you in a very reasonable way saying, like, this hatred of uncertainty is part of being, like, there's good reason, there's biological, there's organic reasons for my
Right.
deep and abiding hatred.
Right. And yet it is precisely, our natural signal of the brain. Well, one neuroscientist told me the brain is telling itself at that moment that there's something to be learned here, which is huge. The status quo won't do, and now it's time to update your view of the world. And so people who are most stressed in unpredictable, difficult, dynamic situations are the ones who are most accurate and good performers. So they're more, it's that wakefulness. It's that being in tune with your environment. And actually, one of the stress hormones that's released, norepinephrine, is related to cognitive effort. So if we retreat or back away, or even just decide this uncertainty is no good, I'm not having anything to do with it, we're kind of squandering this incredible epic chance. I literally call it an epic chance to learn and to grow and to thrive. So
the idea that uncertainty could be a gift, I think this is partly why I read your book so slowly, because I think because for so long my life rested on a series of certainties that made it coherent and frankly lovely and seamless, and I miss it. I miss that deluded sweet self all the time. and like she was great. But unfortunately, that is apparently not the way of the world. And now that I have the awareness of the sort of fissures into everything. I'm constantly trying to think, like, how do I live in this wildly unpredictable, I mean, and there's so many layers of this argument that I want to ask you about. But even just that first desire in the face of difficulty to shut down, to not have that kind of wakefulness. What are the downsides to making these really fast choices about a scary world?
Right. Well, there are so many. I mean, basically, when you shut down on uncertainty, you are closing your mind to, what is the unknown. There's a kind of expression in child development, but it's also it pertains so much to adult growth as well, which is the zone of proximal development. That's often used as a shorthand for scaffolding, but it really means to be at the edge of what you know and pushing, expanding that forward. So it's, as one scientist told me, it's the green bud on the tree. It's where the action is. And so that's, if you are certain, you are basically on an island
Yeah.
in your comfort zone.
Yeah.
You're not expanding that. And so one kind of concrete way to look at this perhaps is that it tells us two things. One is, why uncertainty is not just a wakeful moment that then we want to rush past. It's an accompaniment to all great learning and thinking and creativity. It actually, I went into this book thinking, oh, chapter 1, uncertainty. Then we'll get into the meat of good thinking and etc. But I was so wrong. So one example is the what expertise is. So I went up to Toronto, actually.
Thank you. Thank you for your service.
I witnessed. I was in the operating room, only in Canada, with my little tape record. I was watching one morning an operation where one of Canada's top surgeons was taking out the cancerous half of a gentleman's liver. But the surgeon was all efficiency, barking orders, telling this junior surgeon to go faster, faster. And so he is our ideal of what an expert is in no matter what the domain. And yet we have to ask ourselves, is that really what we want to see in an expert? At one point in the operation, he thought he had cut the bile duct, which is an anathema, never, never do this kind of moment. And the operation fell silent. And what occurred illustrated precisely, heuristic or well-honed know-how is actually the creation of these, solutions that we apply to recognizable problems. We just see that the chest pain equals heart attack, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so we're applying our knowledge, and we can be impressive and facile and a certain kind of expert, but outside unpredictable environments, that kind of expert, called the routine expert, and the one we idolize, actually begins to fail. And so, years of experience are actually only weakly or not correlated at all with skill and accuracy in many, many different fields, from science to medicine to sports. And so, in contrast, adaptive experts are the ones who break the inertia of their knowing in order to gain greater ends. They actually spent adaptive experts, which is a kind of a new type of expertise. It hasn't really been discovered until very recently. And these experts actually spend more time assessing a new, messy problem than even novices do. So what they're doing is using that wakefulness and entering the space of uncertainty and exploring. One roboticist told me uncertainty is a space of possibility.
I see. That adaptive expertise, I've had the privilege now of being able to interview all kinds of people who stay really curious. And until I read your book, I hadn't really connected the dots of how much their willingness to tolerate not knowing, to feel dumb, to ask another question, to look at it from another side. I guess that's why I've really loved them so much, is in my own experience as a patient, I was so terribly misdiagnosed because I was on the super highway of one kind of knowledge. Oh, people don't get colon cancer at my age. Therefore, she can't possibly have stomach pains that are that bad. And therefore, so I just kind of like in the A or B model just ended up in the wrong stream. And since then, the people who are willing to like pump the brakes twice, relook at the map, look at it with me, I've been so impressed by how hard it is to how did you describe it again? It was like about questioning what you think you know.
Break the inertia of your knowledge, because that's where we're most
Oh,
comfortable.
that's so good.
Yeah, and that's so related to curiosity too, because actually curiosity we think of, as a great jolly good thing, and we sort of, I think of anyhow, curiosity as being this 6-year-old skill. But at the same time, research related to curious people show that one of the most important components of curiosity is tolerance of uncertainty. In other
Mm.
words, they're the ones who can be uncomfortable and ask the questions, and yet they also continue to pursue. So you can be curious and it's wonderful. You're asking questions. But the people who really move further into that, the dissenters at work, the people who explore even further, are the ones who are, sort of willing to go forth despite the discomfort. So again, we are not escaping that, discomfort word, which is really different than fear.
And one of the things about uncertainty, it seems, sort of changes the quality of time around us. I've noticed, like, for some situations of great uncertainty, everything just feels like a slideshow. I'm not able to like synthesize what's happening. And that seems like a fear response. But there's been other times, even I'm just thinking of hospital examples, but even in the same hospital, when I've been able to like feel more rooted, and then I can get back to a questiony place, and even it feels a little more dynamic. And also, can I have some peanut butter crackers? And why are you doing that to my arm? But like getting back to curiosity, are we able to kind of shift gears between those frameworks?
Yeah, no, I mean, part of it is expectation. Actually, these studies of learning and dynamic environments show that when you expect there not to be change, and that could be, you refuse to admit change, then you are less likely to pick up on change. And what occurs, and I think this answers your peanut butter cracker question, what occurs is that when you are shutting down, you often are thinking of outcome, or
Yeah.
this is going to be terrible, or, I can't wait to get out of here, which is natural. Again, all very natural. These are all natural pathways to understanding high stakes moments. But at the same time, that's closing you off from being present in the moment and perhaps picking up information or nuance or other people's perspectives. Because in those studies where people were giving presentations that you have very little time to prepare in front of 3 judges who are really glowering at you and taking
Stop.
notes. Yeah, it's awful. And then you're asked to count backwards by 7, and people often just quit. I mean, they just quit. But if they are kind of told about this approach mode, and so therefore able to be in the uncertainty,
Mm.
then they become more engaged.
That's a perfect word, right? As
Mhm.
opposed to this is either performing, I'm giving it to you, or I'm receiving, this is happening to me. Sounds like that it's that shifting into gear with it.
Yes, it's a very uncomfortable thing to do, to wake up to the world. But at the same time, when there's so many ways in which we live in a certainty seeking culture, when we have
Yes.
such a bias from, hundreds of years of the rationalist efficiency seeking and, ideas that the goal is what matters and the process is just carnage along the road. And then we're given little devices that psychologists now call certainty seeking
Mm.
devices. And so there's actually evidence that our intolerance of uncertainty is rising, and many experts that I've talked to think so too. So in that place, I think, a little bit of understanding of uncertainties, wakefulness, but also its space. It's this, yes, it slows you down.
Mm.
A daydream is uncertainty in action, I call it,
The way you describe thoughts as sort of needing a little oxygen, Fordism, like the theory that came from Henry Ford and the industrial model of the assembly line. We learned a lot about labor when we broke people's motions down into parts, and oh, look, we can build cars faster. But we have this very Fordist, very everything is for something attitude, even toward our thoughts. And I, you give us a nice argument for thoughts that don't always have to be useful.
Exactly. And the sort of center, or the gut of my book, the middle of my book is about daydreaming, and then what I call fallow time, which is that quiet time that we might know that it's good to sleep on a problem, although we don't listen to that anymore. And we might know that it's good to, pause before, I don't know, yelling at someone, but at the same time, that research into the power, the efficacy of pausing, resting, and time, spacing things, just reading slowly, as you said you were doing. That just blew me away. Letting your mind catch up to experience is the way I came away thinking about it. When you're pausing, even for a couple minutes, not only is your
Mm.
memory likely for something you've just done likely to improve by 20%. Even this has occurred in people with Alzheimer's, which is almost a kind of miracle. If they don't switch immediately to another task, then they have this great memory boost. But there's more to it than that, because your mind is a living, evolving, changing architecture, a kind of branching tree in a Darwin-esque kind of image that is actually always changing. And your mind, when it's given to its own devices, so to speak, is actually beginning to sift and sort in crosstalk between the hippocampus and the cortex, is beginning to sift and sort and curate where things might fit in your knowledge, where things go. In fact, if you're understanding something that's contrary or contradictory to what you think or believe, it'll take longer, even weeks,
I
to
see.
actually process and create a memory. And Darwin knew this. He actually made sure to write down evidence that went contrary to his own theories, because he knew that those would slip away if he didn't actually try to bolster these living organic ideas.
But it sounds like we can't, that the speed of actual meaning making doesn't go nearly as fast or as efficiently as our very machine like analogies.
Yes, exactly.
Because I always say stuff like that, like, we are not mental machines. But like, you're like, no, really, we're not mental machines.
No, exactly. I'm really trying to sort of move away from, uploading, or I'm programmed to do this, or we're hardwired to do that, because that
Yeah.
negates the humanity. I mean, we are biology. We're
Yeah.
not deficient machines that can't compute as fast as the neural networks that we're creating. We're actually living beings who might not actually understand what life deeply, deeply can do for us. And I think it has a lot to do with restoring faith in the human mind. I've mentioned the cultural sort of allergy that we have to uncertainty, so much so that
Yeah.
CEOs or political leaders who are viewed pausing and deliberating about a new complex problems are promptly labeled less influential.
Oh my gosh. You're like, People yelled people being told that they're flip-floppers when they're like, "Oh, no, no. I just need a
Exactly.
minute for a very complicated problem."
Exactly. And so, but we also have we might have a cultural bias against uncertainty because we want A or B and we
Mm,
want to get to B. But at the same time, there's also this enormous cultural bias against anything that's not knowing. Seen as a vacuum. So the
yeah.
liminal, the gray spaces, the ambiguity, etc., are just seen as something that's not a no man's land.
Mhm.
Absolutely a no man's land. And I went into this book thinking that. I honestly did. I began to find that there was incredible science being done about uncertainty that was really new. That not only do we not like to be in these uncertain places, but people didn't like to study them. I mean, that's how daydreaming was kind of the daydreaming default mode networks were discovered, that people were sitting there lying in a scanner. And when they weren't doing the task that the scientist asked them to do, their brain was more active than when they were doing the game or the problem or etc. And so it was kind of this really strange idea that maybe there was something else there.
Yeah.
And there were actually shouting matches at psychology conferences saying you can't really study nothing because that's not psychology. There's no task. And yet, the default mode is an incredible, brain network related to making meaning and self, identity and etc. It almost was just missed.
Because if you were a self-help author, it would go uncertainty, 5 steps for overcoming it. And then it would be like,
Exactly.
do you sometimes feel like you don't know what's ahead? Great. We have a solution for that.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. Well, as I began poking my nose into this, I thought that I found so much predominant literature on the probabilistic, risk assessment. Let's profit from the uncertainty. Let's find out the likelihood.
There's a kind of person I meet every now and then. I'm just thinking of certain professions in which uncertainty is built into the job environment, and they seem to kind of come alive the more, especially like if it's a I'm there's the easy analogy might be like the emergency room doctor, but there's a kind of brightness that they get in situations that would otherwise stress people out. Do you think that they just magical creatures, or do you think that this ability to sort of quicken and become more alert is something that people like me could learn?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, now research psychologists are actually helping people practice being in the unknown with
Yeah.
in tiny little ways and finding that this lowers anxiety. It lowers depression, worry. It boosts resilience. And I'm talking about studies in multiple sclerosis patients as, long-term conditions, or just college students,
Yeah.
or the people with the most intractable anxiety.
Because those seem to be the people you're like, just leave them alone. Like they're already stressed out. Like don't make people's lives harder.
I know. But there are very simple, practical steps. I mean, often one exercise is to try a new dish on a restaurant, which seems, oh, come on, really. But then I think to myself, oh, you like to go to the neighborhood bistro on Friday. And what do you always get, Maggie? The clam spaghetti. It's like, it really is hard to jostle yourself. And so one exercise that's actually going to be assigned to high schoolers in Columbus, Ohio in the spring by Ohio State researchers is to answer their cell phone without caller ID. And that's something that a young relative of mine, I'm told to mask her identity, said would be terrifying for her generation.
Oh my gosh.
Yes, to answer the cell phone. And oh, yeah, maybe it'll be spam, but it's just the not knowing. And what's really most interesting is that they're using the core premise of uncertainty to become more flexible and nimble and adaptable and curious about the world. In other words, they make a prediction often when they're doing this. Oh, I usually cancel first dates because it's just too unknown. And
Yeah.
So I'm going to say to myself, well, maybe X will happen or Y will happen. And what happens is their predictions usually don't come true. It's not a disaster, or it's
Uh-huh.
not, they don't get married the next day, or, so basically they discover that their certainty about this unknown
Right.
has been broken. They're breaking the inertia of their knowledge again. And so I think that it's really sort of a double
Yeah.
wonderful exercise because, as one scientist told me, no surprise, no learning.
No surprise, no learning. Oh,
Yeah.
that's so true. Because it sounds too like micro-dosed exposure therapy, where you're like, okay, I'm gonna do it to myself. No clam spaghetti for me.
Right.
I mean, there's such an enormous social implication for what you're describing. This information information age goes in quotation marks. This information age that has sorted us into such sharp binaries. You like this, you're bad. You hate this, you're good. I'm right, you're deluded. It does seem like the most pressing question of today's climate is how do we pry our hearts and minds open to each other when it feels like it would be safer and smarter to just like foreclose that connection.
Exactly. Exactly. No, I mean, there's a social side to uncertainty that's very, very important for us to begin to delve into, as you say, because we're inside the walls of our own perspective and don't even want to look. I mean, 80% of Republicans, but equal numbers of Democrats think the other side politically has few or no good ideas, and the dehumanization, the book bans, the hate, et cetera, et cetera. And actually, I came down to Durham to meet a civil rights activist who had an amazing life. But
Oh, yes, you met Durham's own Ann Atwater. Is that right?
I did, and it was really only a few weeks before she died. And she was, and still is, this extraordinary hero. But partly because in 1973, when they were just about to desegregate the schools and tensions were running high, she was co-chair of a series of meetings to pave the way for the desegregation of the schools. And her partner, her co-chair, was the local KKK Klan leader, and it was an amazing, phenomenon that they weren't even named to co-chair these meetings. But secondly, that they were pulled off. But then she did something which entirely illustrates, one of the most amazing strategies, perspective taking for pushing back on prejudice and bias. When people merely take the perspective of a refugee or a convicted felon or the opposite side politically, they are actually willing to sit closer to them. They're willing to see them as a teammate. They're willing to engage, which of course then begins to have its own virtuous cycle. So what's amazing is that perspective taking is just a leap of imagination. You do not know what their perspective is. Even if you love and they're your twin sister, you don't know anyone's perspective. And so you are, by taking this leap of imagination into their perspective, you're actually kind of jolting your assumptions in a way that loosens that label and that categorization that's so innate. And what Ann Atwater did at the close of these meetings was to bring in a gospel choir to celebrate, which is lovely. And but her partner, C.P. Ellis, actually put up an exhibit that same evening. He kind of retreated from the collaboration that they had been experiencing, and it was a hateful, terrible Klan exhibit of paraphernalia and photos, etc. And at the moment when a group of teenagers in a largely Black neighborhood were coming to tear down, you could say naturally so, to take down that exhibit, she blocked the door and yelled, "You can't do that. What are you doing? You can't, you have to see what makes him think to know where another person is." That is, how we can go forward. And I'm paraphrasing, but it was an incredible act that still ripples through history. And they became friends and he quit the Klan. And we can't say it was only that moment, but what she did was she removed herself from being his enemy because she gave him the entry point to change and for them to move forward together. And it was an incredible moment. It was an incredible moment, all based on uncertainty.
Yes. Right. I think it was a long time before I even allowed uncertainty to like change my actual mental grid. I think I had still largely been thinking of uncertainty as just the big bad, like just the awfulness of living in a world that's not fair. It was the work of Dorothy Day and her account of precarity that changed my mind. Reinhold Niebuhr had also been talking about precarity, the uncertainty, the things can be taken away at any minute feeling, but he had described precarity as the thing that has to be overcome, like, and then soon we'll get back to the way things were. And she just really, I mean, I'm sure because she was chose to live with people who had no secure housing. Her movement never had enough money, and like, and of course, people who choose to live in poverty among people who are impoverished, they like understand that you can like have to take on the presuppositions of it. But man, like when she just described it as like the lens through which you can see things, that really clicked something in my brain. But until I saw your book, Maggie, I had not at all thought about the scientific and social implications of maybe it as a gift. So like thank you so much for describing ways that it can help us pay attention and tune in and re-engage in a world that otherwise feels so scary and overwhelming. Maggie, you are my brain friend, and I am so grateful to have met you.
Oh, thank you for a wonderful conversation. Writing this book changed how I relate to, friends who are in a difficult moment, whether to
Yeah.
instead of trying to hurry them out of it or paper over it to maybe protect my own anxious self. Now I have much more capability of being with them in it.
It's helping make me softer, or at least I hope more responsive to life as it actually is.
Not as you wish it to be or assume it to be.
And until everyone puts me in charge. And then, oh my gosh, utopia.
I'll vote for you.
Maggie, thank you so much. That was awesome.